Hello, and welcome to the second in a series of podcasts covering Standard and Benchmark 3.2. In this podcast, we'll be getting a first look at the process of photosynthesis. We'll be learning a little bit about light and where photosynthesis occurs in plants. For Kalani High School, this is the Allaire Report, and I'm your host, Mr. Allaire. One of the most important things to remember about photosynthesis is, first of all, that it's used by plants. Animals don't use photosynthesis. Remember, plants are autotrophs, meaning that they produce their own energy. The other thing to remember is that photosynthesis is a process. It's not something that happens once. It is a continuous cycle that allows plants to produce their own energy, to produce their own food. And in this process, plants take sunlight and they use it to convert water and carbon dioxide into oxygen and high-energy carbohydrates like sugars and starches. And if you wanted to really boil this down, you can turn it into a chemical reaction like the one displayed here, with carbon dioxide and water as reactants and the sugar and oxygen as products. For those people who are a little bit more visually oriented, we have here a diagram of a chloroplast. So light and energy hits a plant, its cells, and the chloroplasts inside of it, at the same time taking in carbon dioxide and water. The energy facilitates the reaction, it's a catalyst, and the products of this reaction are sugar, in this case glucose with the formula C6H12O6, as well as oxygen. Now, although the equation tells you that water and carbon dioxide are required for photosynthesis, this really doesn't tell you how plants use these low-energy raw materials to produce high-energy sugars. But before we get into the process of photosynthesis, we need to take a step back and we need to think about light and pigments. Photosynthesis requires light and a chemical called chlorophyll, which is found in chloroplasts. Now, for millions of years, plants have been gathering the sun's energy with light-absorbing molecules called pigments. Now, the principal, or most commonly found pigment in plants, is called chlorophyll. And there are actually two different types of chlorophylls. There's chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. Now, regardless of which type you're talking about, you need to remember that these chlorophylls have one job and one job only, and that is to absorb light. But it's important to remember that chlorophyll doesn't absorb all of the light of the visible spectrum. The type of light it absorbs best are from the blue and the red regions of the visible spectrum. You can tell right away by looking at a plant that red and blue are being absorbed because those types of light cannot be seen. We can only see light that is reflected. And since we don't see red or we don't see blue, those types of light have been absorbed. Now, if red and blue are being absorbed, then what gets reflected? Green. Chlorophyll does not absorb light well in the green region of the visible spectrum, and this is why plants are green. Green light gets reflected, not absorbed. So we need to remember that light is a form of energy, just like heat or electricity. And just like there are things that absorb heat, there are things that absorb electricity, there are also things that absorb light. And plants are full of these compounds that do nothing but absorb light. And the energy from this light that gets absorbed is transferred directly into the electrons in the chlorophyll molecule. Now that we know a little bit more about how light interacts with a plant, let's take a look at where photosynthesis is going to be occurring. On leaves, within the cells of a plant, you have these tiny packets called chloroplasts. These chloroplasts are the site of photosynthesis in plants. Now, chloroplasts contain teeny tiny photosynthetic membranes called thylakoids. And this is what makes plants so magnificent at producing energy. Instead of trying to produce a lot of energy, they have these tiny packets producing a little bit of energy. So inside of a chloroplast, you can have hundreds of thylakoids, and then you can have hundreds of chloroplasts inside of a cell. And then, of course, you have millions of cells inside of a plant, all producing very small amounts of energy. Now these thylakoids are all arranged in stacks called grana, and thylakoids contain the chlorophyll and other pigments that capture the energy of the sunlight. Remember, the fact that plants are green means that green is being reflected, not absorbed. Now when sunlight gets absorbed, it excites electrons in the chlorophyll, and the electrons gain energy. Now think for a moment. An excited electron is like a hot coal. Would you try to pick up a hot coal with your bare hands and move it to someplace else? Of course you wouldn't. You would need something special in order to carry it. Well, cells have this same thing. They call it NADP, which is a real tongue twister called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. But you don't have to know that. You just need to know that it's called NADP. NADP is a special carrier molecule that cells use to transport high-energy electrons to other molecules. And when it's transporting it, it grabs 2 electrons plus a hydrogen atom, turning it into what's called NADPH. And NADPH carries the high-energy electrons wherever the cells need them. Now, photosynthesis can be broken down into 2 major pieces. First are the light-dependent reactions, where the ATP and the NADPH is created. That moves to the Calvin cycle, where glucose and other types of longer forms of energy are created. And that's where we'll pick up in our next podcast. So, if you have any questions, please make sure to write them down so that we can discuss them in class. And next time, we'll get into the light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle that make up photosynthesis.